The clock struck midnight, and the city seemed to vanish beneath the blanket of darkness. Streetlights flickered, casting jagged shadows across empty roads, while the distant hum of traffic sounded more like a warning than a lullaby. For most, this hour is a time to sleep, to drift away in the safety of blankets and warmth. But for those who work the graveyard shift, it is a different world entirely. A world where silence can feel alive, and every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind is magnified, feeding the imagination until reality itself feels fragile. Tonight, you are about to step into that world, guided by stories that are not just fiction, but chilling accounts from people who have lived through moments that make the ordinary night terrifying. Our first story begins in a hospital. Hospitals at night are strange places. The corridors are long, the lighting dim, and the occasional echo of a rolling cart or a distant cough can unsettle even the most seasoned night shift nurse. Lisa, a nurse with 10 years of experience, never thought she would meet something she couldn't explain. On one particularly slow night, she was making her rounds in the intensive care unit. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet. The usual beeping of machines and murmurs of patients had faded to a hollow silence. She checked on Mr. Harding, a patient recovering from surgery, and noticed something odd. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, yet his breathing pattern was completely flat, like a mannequin's. Thinking she was imagining it, Lisa blinked and looked again. But then she saw it, a shadow moving across the ceiling, curling like smoke, impossible to identify. She froze, heart pounding. She called out to a colleague, but the response was muffled, distant, as if coming from another world. When her co-worker arrived, the shadow was gone, and Mr. Harding was breathing normally, as though nothing had happened. But Lisa never forgot the sensation of being watched by something intangible, a presence that didn't belong in the human realm. For the rest of her shift, every step felt heavier, every corridor longer, every shadow a potential threat. Contrast, however, is essential in horror. The mundane moments amplify the fear that follows. Imagine the hospital break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of reheated coffee, the low hum of conversation between exhausted staff. By day, it's a place of respite, of small talk and laughter. By night, it becomes a stage for tension. The air feels thicker, the corners darker, and the small noises of daily life, an idle drip from the sink, the creak of a chair, gains sinister undertones. On one night shift, maintenance worker Tom experienced this firsthand. He was alone in the boiler room, checking pipes for leaks, when the temperature dropped suddenly. Steam rose unnaturally fast, and he could hear the faintest whispers, almost like someone reciting numbers, but not numbers he recognized. Tom spun around, flashlight slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. When he returned to the break room, he found a note on the counter, written in handwriting that wasn't his. "You should not be here. It's these small, unexplained intrusions that make graveyard stories so unnerving. Fear does not always come in loud, dramatic bursts. Often it creeps in, subtle and unrelenting. Consider the security guard who patrols an office building after hours. His routine is simple: check the floors, monitor the cameras, report any anomalies. One night, however, he noticed a figure on the surveillance feed, a person in a business suit, walking the halls as if part of the nightly staff. But the camera showed all doors locked, all floors empty. He called the police, expecting a prank or a malfunction. When they arrived, the building was completely vacant, except for a single coffee cup on a desk, steaming as though freshly poured. Shifting focus to the world of delivery drivers, night workers often encounter the unknown in the most unexpected places. Julia, a courier, was delivering a package to a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town. The sky was overcast, and the moon barely illuminated the deserted road. As she parked and approached the building, she noticed footprints in the dust leading to the entrance. Curiously, the footprints stopped abruptly, right at the doorway, with no sign of anyone entering. Inside, the warehouse was dark and silent. Yet, as she walked down the aisle, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing behind her. When she turned, no one was there. Every rational part of her mind screamed for her to leave. But she continued, driven by the sense that the story she would tell later needed to be experienced firsthand. At the far end of the warehouse, she found the package, but also a small, hand-drawn symbol on the floor. One she didn't recognize, etched with what appeared to be charcoal or ash. Even those who work with machines are not immune. Factory workers on night shifts report experiences that defy logic. A forklift operator named Marcus recounted a night when the machines seemed to move independently. Conveyors started without activation. Robotic arms shifted in precise, human-like motions, and an eerie, low humming filled the factory floor. Marcus felt a presence behind him, a weight that pressed on his shoulders, though no one was there. He ran to the exit, only to see the main doors slam shut as if held by invisible hands. After hours of struggle, the doors finally opened, revealing an empty parking lot bathed in moonlight. Everything as normal as if nothing had happened. Marcus never returned to the night shift. Contrast comes alive in these accounts. The ordinary setting, a hospital, an office, a warehouse, a factory, is rendered terrifying not by sudden violence, but by subtle distortions of reality. Night shift horror often relies on the delicate tension between expectation and the unknown. A quiet hallway becomes a corridor of suspense. A routine check becomes an encounter with the inexplicable. And while rational explanations may exist, fatigue, imagination, technical glitches, the stories persist because they resonate with a deeper fear, the fear that the world we know can shift at any moment, revealing layers we cannot comprehend. Some stories are particularly disturbing because the witnesses cannot even articulate what they saw. Consider Emma, a receptionist at a 24-hour motel. On a routine night, she glanced at the surveillance monitors and noticed a guest who wasn't registered. The person moved through the lobby with unnerving precision, leaving no footprints, no disturbances, yet triggering alarms on every motion sensor in the building. Emma called for assistance, but when her manager arrived, the footage had changed. Every frame showing only the empty lobby, no guest in sight. To this day, she keeps a notebook documenting oddities she encounters on night shifts, each entry more unsettling than the last, a testament to the quiet terror that thrives when the world sleeps. Another chilling encounter comes from a truck stop diner. Night wait staff report customers who appear for only a few seconds vanishing the moment someone turns to take their order. One server, Dave, recounted pouring coffee for a man who stared silently across the room. When Dave looked back, the man was gone, leaving the cup on the counter still steaming. It's these brief, inexplicable moments that create unease. Not the obvious jump scares, but the persistent uncertainty that something is there, just out of reach, observing. Perhaps the most frightening aspect of these tales is the interplay between isolation and normalcy. Night shift workers are alone in environments designed for bustling activity. Silence amplifies every sound. Shadows stretch unnaturally, and fatigue blurs the line between imagination and reality. A simple creak of a chair, a flicker of fluorescent light, a misplaced item becomes a signal that the night holds secrets beyond human understanding. The tension builds gradually, relying on the contrast between the known world and the unpredictable unknown. As the first few hours of the night pass, the senses heighten. Eyes catch movement in peripheral vision. Ears detect faint whispers, and intuition warns that something is amiss. These heightened states are fertile ground for horror to thrive. And for those who work night after night, the line between real and imagined grows thin. Stories accumulate, shared quietly during brief breaks, a silent fraternity of the wary who have glimpsed the other side of ordinary life. We end this first section with a subtle reminder. Not all terror comes in dramatic, cinematic bursts. Often, the most unsettling stories are those that start with a whisper, a shadow, or a fleeting glance. The night shift is a portal into a reality where the rules bend and the familiar becomes frightening. As you close your eyes tonight, consider that somewhere, someone is walking these same empty halls, navigating the same quiet corridors, feeling the same brush of presence that you may never see but could sense. The night stretches on, and the world outside seems to disappear entirely, swallowed by darkness. Inside, the pulse of fluorescent lights hums like a heartbeat, and every shadow feels alive. For night shift workers, the ordinary becomes strange, and the strange becomes terrifyingly ordinary. Our next story begins in a call center, where rows of cubicles stretch endlessly under harsh lighting, phones ringing intermittently, creating a rhythm that lulls employees into a false sense of routine, until the routine breaks. David, a technical support operator, had been working nights for nearly a year. One particularly slow Tuesday, the office was quieter than usual. No calls coming in, only the low buzz of computers. He glanced around and noticed a figure in the distance, seated at a desk that had been empty for weeks. At first, he thought it was a new hire. But as he approached, the figure dissolved like smoke, leaving only the faint scent of cologne lingering in the stale air. Shaken, David brushed it off as exhaustion. But the sensation of being watched never left him. He began noticing subtle things. Items moved slightly. Monitors flickered even when powered off. And sometimes he heard breathing over the phone lines when no one was on the other end. Contrast amplifies fear in stories like this. During the day, the same call center is filled with chatter, ringing phones, and the comforting presence of co-workers. At night, silence dominates, and the mind fills it with possibilities. Every sound becomes a potential threat. Every movement a question of reality. For David, the breaking point came when he left the office and found all the doors he had locked wide open, the security cameras showing nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if someone, or something, had wandered freely through the building while he had been alone, invisible to every lens, unseen yet undeniably present. Factories and warehouses provide similar grounds for terror. The night is when machines sleep, or at least they should. Jake, a night security guard for a sprawling industrial complex, recounted one of the most unnerving experiences of his career. While making his routine rounds, he noticed lights flickering across different sections of the factory floor. Curious, he approached, and the clanging of machinery began without explanation. Forklifts moved in tight, deliberate patterns. Conveyor belts whirred, and robotic arms reached out with a precision that seemed almost human. And yet, the floor was empty. No workers, no engineers, no one but Jake. He called the main office, expecting to hear voices on the other end, to explain what he was seeing. Instead, the line crackled and went silent. Then, a single phrase whispered through the speaker. "You shouldn't be here." Jake ran, his footsteps echoing across the empty halls, the machine stopping as abruptly as they had started, leaving him alone in the dark. Even after years of working night shifts, he never returned. The factory, a place of routine labor by day, had transformed into a landscape of unexplained menace at night. Contrast is again key. By day, these environments are predictable, safe, and mundane. By night, isolation magnifies every imperfection, every flicker of light, every faint sound. Even those who feel rational and grounded are not immune. Sarah, a janitor at a university, shared a story that began innocently. She was cleaning the chemistry lab late at night, moving from one countertop to another. The building was empty, the hallways silent. She paused to wipe down a bench and felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, no one was there. She shrugged, assuming a student had stayed behind. But as she walked to the exit, she saw chalk writing on the board in a room she hadn't entered. It read simply, "I see you." Her pulse quickened, and she finished her shift in silence, avoiding eye contact with any reflective surfaces, constantly aware of movement just outside her vision. Sometimes, the most terrifying moments are not about what is seen, but what is felt. Michael, a 24-hour truck stop manager, spoke of nights when the air itself seemed heavy, pressing down with a subtle but undeniable force. Patrons came and went in unusual patterns, often disappearing as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind items that hadn't been there moments before. A steaming cup of coffee, a single shoe, a crumpled napkin with a message written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. Michael could never explain these occurrences, but he learned to respect the unseen boundaries of the night. Even isolated rural night shifts are fertile ground for horror. Consider the story of Emily, a gas station attendant on a desolate highway. Late one night, a man approached, face obscured under a hood. He didn't speak, only stared. Emily, wary, kept her distance. When she turned away to check the register, he was gone, vanished into the darkness without a trace. Moments later, the automatic doors opened and closed repeatedly, though the sensors showed no one passing through. Even seasoned locals, familiar with the area's tricks of light and shadow, agreed that the events defied explanation. Contrast amplifies tension further. A bustling gas station during the day is ordinary, familiar, a place of commerce and casual conversation. At night, isolation magnifies the smallest anomaly into an existential question. Was that man ever really there? Or was it the night itself playing tricks on the mind? Stories like Emily's demonstrate the psychological aspect of graveyard horror. The blend of isolation, fatigue, and subtle distortion of reality creates an environment where fear can flourish unchecked. Even when multiple people are present, night can transform ordinary co-workers into actors in an unseen drama. At a 24-hour diner, waitstaff recount seeing colleagues interact with figures that vanish upon closer inspection. One cook, Mark, swore he saw a line cook from the previous decade, still wearing the old uniform, chopping vegetables in perfect rhythm. When he pointed this out, the figure disappeared, leaving only an empty space and the faint scent of perfume long gone from the premises. Such experiences create a lingering doubt, an understanding that time and memory themselves may bend in the late hours, and that the night can resurrect echoes of the past to haunt the present. Even mundane tasks become unnerving. Cleaning floors, restocking shelves, monitoring equipment. These are ordinary jobs. But during the night, Every step echoes differently. Floors seem to stretch endlessly. Lights flicker in irregular patterns, and distant sounds carry with unnatural clarity. There is an intimacy to these sounds, a closeness that suggests observation. The night shift becomes a theater where unseen forces stage their scenes. Each worker unknowingly cast as a participant in events beyond comprehension. The stories of night shift horror share common threads. Isolation, subtle distortions of reality, and the unseen presence that evokes unease. They are not about loud screams or grotesque monsters, but about the quiet invasion of normal life by forces that remain unexplained. A hallway, a corridor, an empty office, a deserted warehouse. Any of these can become the stage for a story that chills, not through spectacle, but through the slow, relentless tension of the unknown. And it is the contrast, the shift from day to night, from normalcy to subtle terror, that gives these stories their power. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. Mundane routines transform into psychological trials, and the unseen becomes a constant companion. Each story builds upon the last, layering unease until the night itself feels alive, watching, waiting. As the night deepens, the experiences accumulate. Workers share whispered tales during brief breaks, recounting moments when logic failed, when the impossible seemed to brush against their reality. These stories serve as both warnings and confirmations. The night holds secrets, and those who work through it are uniquely attuned to the subtle, disturbing truths lurking just beyond perception. We close this section with a lingering thought. Every night shift is a doorway into a world where reality blurs. Shadows move without reason, and the ordinary becomes terrifyingly unpredictable. If you find yourself awake at this hour, remember that you share the night with those who have seen what others cannot. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of your own world, the night has been observing you as well. The night deepens, and the shadows grow longer, stretching across empty hallways and abandoned buildings. For those who work through the graveyard shift, these spaces can take on a life of their own, whispering secrets that only the isolated can hear. Our next story begins in an abandoned hospital, a place where echoes of the past linger like dust motes in the dim light. The building had been closed for decades, yet the night security guard, Thomas, was assigned to patrol it. What he encountered would haunt him for the rest of his life. At first, the silence was profound, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and fills your mind with imagined sounds. Thomas walked through the corridors, flashlight cutting through the darkness, each step triggering a symphony of creaks and groans from the building itself. Then he heard it, a rhythmic tapping, like the sound of fingers drumming on metal. He stopped, holding his breath, scanning the hallway. There was no one there. The tapping continued, moving closer, faster. Yet whenever he turned a corner, the source remained elusive. Contrast is central to this type of fear. During the day, hospitals are full of life. Doctors and nurses, patients, the constant hum of activity. At night, the same hallways become corridors of uncertainty, where the echoes of history seem to interact with the living. Thomas's heartbeat quickened as he approached the old operating theater. The door, which had been closed when he arrived, was now ajar. Inside, he saw faint shadows moving across the walls. But every time he aimed his flashlight, they vanished. The room felt alive, charged with energy that was at once oppressive and electric. Abandoned factories and industrial complexes tell similar tales. Claire, a night janitor at a shuttered textile mill, recounted her first night on the job. The building smelled of rust and old fabric, a mixture that lingered in the throat and nose. She began her rounds, vacuuming and dusting, when she noticed the massive looms starting to move on their own, chains clanking and belts rolling. The machines had been disconnected from power months before. Claire froze, watching as the looms moved in a synchronized rhythm, almost as if following an invisible conductor. Terrified, she fled, not stopping until she reached the safety of her car. Even then, the sensation of being watched lingered, a reminder that the night had its own rules. Contrast between day and night is what transforms the ordinary into something terrifying. By day, these spaces are dormant or bustling with work. But at night, they become arenas for the uncanny. It is during these hours that the world feels less governed by human logic and more susceptible to forces unseen. Fear is heightened by the mind's natural tendency to search for patterns, to assign intent where there is none, and to imagine presence where isolation reigns. Psychological tension often builds through repetition. Night shift workers recount moments where events repeat with eerie precision, as if the environment itself were enacting a ritual. A security officer in a high-rise office complex noticed the elevator doors opening to floors that no longer existed. Each night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the lights on the lobby display board flickered and the elevator chimed. When he rode it, he saw shadowy figures pressing against the glass, staring back at him with blank, expressionless faces. By morning, the signs were gone, leaving only the memory of what he had seen and the dread of its inevitable return. Even solitary environments, like rural convenience stores, carry their own horrors. John, a night attendant on the outskirts of a small town, experienced an encounter that defied all explanation. He was restocking shelves when the security cameras captured a figure walking the aisles. But when he turned, no one was there. Moments later, products fell from the shelves in patterns, spelling out messages like "go" and "leave." The night itself seemed to communicate, to assert its presence in subtle but undeniable ways. The unseen often manifests through touch or sensation. Workers report cold drafts in enclosed rooms, the feeling of being brushed past by invisible hands, or the sensation of breath on the back of their necks. These experiences are not merely imagined. They trigger physical responses: goosebumps, shivers, and accelerated heart rates. The night exploits vulnerability, using isolation and sensory manipulation to create an environment where fear becomes tangible. Another common motif involves time distortion. In one story, a data center technician found herself checking servers at midnight, only to glance at the clock and see hours had passed. In what felt like minutes, lights flickered in impossible sequences. Screens displayed unreadable code, and the hum of machinery seemed to carry whispers. When she tried to report the anomalies, her colleagues had no recollection of the events. The night had created a parallel reality, one she experienced alone, where normal rules of time and perception no longer applied. Abandoned urban environments add a layer of unpredictability. Night security at old apartment complexes often report hearing children's laughter or music in vacant hallways. One officer, Mark, noted the faint sound of a piano playing from a unit that had been empty for years. Upon investigation, he found nothing, but the sound persisted, fading only when dawn approached. The auditory phenomena were often subtle, easily dismissed during the day, but at night they became inescapable. A reminder that the absence of light intensifies both perception and imagination. Contrast between isolation and fleeting human contact heightens fear. A hospital janitor might pass a lone night nurse, exchange a word, and feel a momentary sense of safety, only to enter another corridor where shadows stretch unnaturally long and the air grows impossibly cold. In these spaces, the ordinary acts of living, walking, cleaning, observing, become exercises in endurance, as though the night itself is testing the resilience of those who dare to occupy it. Sometimes, the terror stems from the uncanny valley of human presence. Security cameras catch figures that move with unnatural smoothness or appear in places that defy physical access. One warehouse worker noticed a reflection in a glass door, herself, perfectly mirrored. But when she stepped forward, her reflection smiled back independently, then vanished. These subtle distortions of familiar reality are deeply unsettling, exploiting the mind's reliance on patterns and predictability. Even ordinary vehicles can be part of the horror. Delivery drivers report vans and trucks that seem to follow them, always maintaining distance but disappearing when confronted. A pizza delivery man described a customer who appeared at the door for minutes, only to vanish mid-conversation, leaving a half-finished order behind. The experience left him shaken, as if the night itself had rewritten reality around him, bending it to its own unknowable will. Isolation, repetition, sensory distortion, and uncanny encounters combine to form a consistent pattern in graveyard shift horror stories. The ordinary becomes strange, and the strange becomes terrifyingly intimate. Each night, the world seems to open a door to experiences that the day would never permit, and those who pass through it are forced to confront the boundaries of perception and the fragile nature of reality itself. Even when the night shift worker leaves the building, the echoes linger. Dreams are haunted, and everyday life carries subtle traces of the encounters. Fleeting shadows in peripheral vision, objects slightly out of place, the feeling of eyes on the back of the neck. These stories remind us that fear is not always a result of what is visible, but of what is possible, of the unseen, the unexplained, and the unknowable dimensions that awaken when the world sleeps. We end this section with the understanding that the night shift is more than a schedule. It is an invitation to witness the hidden layers of existence. From abandoned hospitals to empty warehouses, from rural highways to city rooftops, the night offers encounters that test courage, perception, and sanity. The stories persist because they resonate with a fundamental truth. The dark holds more than shadows, and those who walk within it become witnesses to realities most will never perceive. The night grows heavier, almost pressing down on those who remain awake while the rest of the world sleeps. For night shift workers, the air seems thicker, the shadows deeper, and every sound amplified in ways that defy explanation. Our next story takes place in a rural cemetery, a place where silence reigns but is never pure. Amelia, a caretaker for the graveyard, arrived just as the last of the evening visitors left. Her task was simple: make rounds, check the lights, and ensure no vandals disturbed the resting souls. But that night, the cemetery had other plans. As Amelia walked along the winding paths between the tombstones, she noticed something unusual: a series of footprints in the freshly fallen dew. The prints were small, child-sized, yet led to sections of the cemetery that were closed to the public. Following the path out of curiosity and a twinge of unease, she reached an old mausoleum. Inside, the air was unnaturally cold, and the smell of earth and decay was thick. She shone her flashlight across the marble walls and inscriptions, only to see a shadow flit across the floor, moving faster than any human could. Contrast frames the terror here perfectly. Cemeteries are symbols of rest and finality during the day. They offer solace and a quiet space for reflection. At night, these same places become stages for the unknown. Shadows stretch and twist, sounds echo unpredictably, and even the smallest disturbance can feel like a sign of something far larger and more malevolent. Amelia's heart pounded as she tried to leave, but the path she had taken seemed to shift, leading her deeper into the cemetery instead of back toward the exit. Sensory distortion is a recurring theme. A night janitor named Peter worked in a sprawling university library. The building was old, with high ceilings, narrow corridors, and forgotten rooms locked behind rusted doors. While shelving books, Peter felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He turned to see a figure, tall and indistinct, standing among the stacks. When he approached, the figure dissolved into a mist. Moments later, a book fell off a shelf inches from his face. By the end of his shift, Peter's perception of the library had changed entirely. Every corner seemed to hide eyes. Every whisper carried intent, and the building itself felt alive. Urban legends often feed on the night shift experience. In one city, a night security guard at a shopping mall reported hearing children's laughter echoing through empty corridors. Following the sound, he discovered a small, makeshift playground tucked behind a set of locked doors. The swings moved on their own, squeaking rhythmically, and the slides had impressions as though someone had just slid down them. When he returned the next night, the playground had vanished, replaced by a blank concrete wall. Such encounters illustrate how the night can blur reality, creating moments that challenge logic and sanity. Even industrial environments are not immune. A factory night watchman named Eric recounted a harrowing experience with machinery. Large dormant machines began operating on their own, their gears turning with precision. He approached cautiously, only to witness shadowy figures riding the machines, twisting in impossible angles. Their faces were always obscured, but their intent seemed clear. Eric was being observed, judged, and possibly warned. By sunrise, the machines were silent once more. Yet Eric knew what he had seen was not a hallucination. The night had shown him something beyond the ordinary. Psychological manipulation is subtle yet effective. Many night shift workers describe time slipping away. In one story, a call center operator named Linda glanced at the clock at midnight. Minutes later, she looked again, only to realize 3 hours had passed without her noticing. Calls she had not taken appeared logged. Messages she did not hear were listed in her inbox. The office felt like it existed in a parallel time stream, where reality was malleable and her mind was the only anchor. By the end of her shift, Linda was convinced that night itself had taken liberties with her perception. Even in more mundane settings, fear persists. Convenience stores, gas stations, and empty streets become stages for inexplicable occurrences. A night gas station attendant described a customer entering with a hooded jacket. The man asked for directions, but his voice was hollow, as though echoing from a distance. When the attendant turned to fetch a map, the customer had vanished, leaving only the echo of his steps. The station camera footage later revealed a blurred, semi-transparent figure walking among the aisles, impossible to identify. Contrast continues to be a driving force in horror. Ordinary workplaces, familiar routines, and mundane tasks become vessels for the extraordinary. A data entry clerk working through the night noticed documents rearranging themselves, computer screens flickering with unknown files, and subtle whispers emanating from the vents. By morning, everything returned to normal, as though the night had been a fleeting supernatural visitor, testing boundaries, observing vulnerabilities, and leaving fear as its mark. sleep deprivation plays a role as well. A hospital nurse working consecutive night shifts began experiencing hallucinations, or so she thought. Patients appeared and disappeared. Voices spoke in unrecognizable languages, and the lights flickered in unnatural patterns. Her colleagues dismissed her experiences as fatigue-induced delusions. But one night, she captured a figure on security footage, a silhouette standing in the hallway, smiling directly at the camera, then vanishing. Night shift horror is often amplified by the body's weakened defenses, allowing fear to infiltrate perception more easily. Even the natural world seems altered. Roads empty of traffic become avenues of dread. Wind through trees carries whispers, and animals act strangely in ways humans cannot interpret. A delivery driver on a remote highway witnessed deer that moved with uncanny synchronization, turning their heads to watch him pass. Fog rolled in unpredictably, forming shapes that seemed almost human, and the moonlight cast shadows that danced independently of their sources. The night shifted reality, creating a liminal space where the familiar became alien and the alien threatened to become real. Supernatural encounters are often intertwined with human fear. A night custodian at an abandoned school noticed the chalkboard writing itself. Messages appeared, often cryptic or threatening, fading when approached. Classrooms that had been empty for decades felt occupied, with chairs slightly displaced, papers rustling without wind, and doors opening slowly on their own. These incidents created a psychological trap. Fear compounded fear, until the mundane act of walking a hallway became a confrontation with the unseen. Isolation intensifies perception. When alone, the mind heightens its sensitivity to anomalies, interpreting minor irregularities as threats. A warehouse worker described hearing footsteps echoing across empty floors. Each time he investigated, the sound stopped, only to resume moments later, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. The anticipation and uncertainty created a mental strain, as though the environment itself were alive, observing and playing games designed to unsettle. Even ordinary technology becomes a conduit for terror. Phones ring without being touched. Monitors display fleeting images, and motion sensors trigger without cause. A night security officer recounted cameras displaying figures that appeared for mere seconds, then dissolved into static. Attempts to track or record these phenomena failed. The equipment behaved normally during the day, yet at night, it became a medium for the unknown. By now, the pattern is clear. The night shift transforms the world, revealing layers of reality normally hidden in daylight. Every story shares common elements: contrast between light and dark, isolation, sensory distortion, time manipulation, and encounters with the inexplicable. These experiences are terrifying because they resonate with universal fears: being watched, losing control, and confronting forces beyond understanding. We close this section with a chilling realization. The night does not merely conceal, it reveals. It exposes hidden truths, unseen entities, and the vulnerability inherent in solitude. For those who work the graveyard shift, the world at night is alive in ways the day cannot comprehend, and surviving its hours requires more than vigilance. It requires courage, resilience, and the ability to accept that some mysteries are beyond explanation. The night shift's true terror lies not in the places or figures themselves, but in the way they exploit our deepest fears: solitude, uncertainty, and helplessness. A single creak, shadow, or whisper can magnify into an encounter that feels impossibly real. Across graveyards, factories, libraries, and empty streets, countless night workers have borne witness to phenomena that defy logic. Some return shaken, others never speak of what they saw, and a few are never seen again. As the first light of dawn breaks, the night relinquishes its grip, leaving only traces, unexplained footprints, fleeting shadows, or the lingering echo of a laugh or whisper. Yet those who experienced it know the truth. Night is alive, observant, and patient. It does not forget, and it never stops. For anyone stepping into the darkness, the question remains: will you see, or will the night see you first?